Welcome. I'm Catherine Cuellar with the City of Dallas, and my guest is Donna Rubin, curator of the Speaking While Female Speech Bank and author of a new women's anthology of speeches. She is dedicated to preserving the voices and words of female speakers. Thanks for joining us, Donna.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us about Speaking While Female and what it is you are doing and what you've done.
Well, I got really interested in the question of who spoke in history. Why was it that we always learned about male speakers in history? In the history books, in our media, in our public conversations, we always hear about people like Winston Churchill or Abraham Lincoln or Patrick Henry or Mahatma Gandhi or Frederick Douglass. We never hear about women. Could it be actually that women never spoke in public? So that's the question that I started with. And from there, I did a lot of research.
And what did you find?
I found out that women have been speaking at every period in history. Women were standing up and speaking, whether it was an address, a lecture, a sermon, a speech, testimony in court, testimony before legislatures. Women have been speaking, and not just that, but their words have had impact. They've changed the words, they've changed the world with their words, but we don't learn about them. We don't know anything about them.
So how have you gone about capturing that particular history of women?
Well, I got obsessed, of course. I did a lot of research. I did years of research. I looked in old manuscripts, in out-of-print books, in old newspapers, in archives, and I started collecting the speeches. My first mission was to just make them accessible. So I created a website called Speaking While Female, and on that website there are thousands, literally thousands of speeches by women, women from every place around the world, every race, every ethnicity, every point of view, and I put them all on this website it's a free resource that's being used by teachers and students around the world. And then I decided out of that to publish a book, an anthology of just American women's speeches by women in the United States.
So among those women, what local connections have you found?
Well, I've discovered, it should be no surprise, but it was news to me, that women in Texas have been speaking for 150, 200 years about all the issues that women have spoken about everywhere else. They spoke about civil rights, they spoke against slavery, they spoke for temperance, they spoke for women's suffrage, they spoke for every issue under the sun. Women have been there and they've been present. It's just that newspapers very often didn't write down what they wrote, history books didn't capture it, they weren't quoted, so therefore it's almost as if they disappeared.
So among those that have reappeared through your research and work, who are some of the most interesting that you have been excited to hear from?
Well, it's very hard to select just a few because there are so many. So my first message to our audience is to look in the archive and discover how rich the history is of women speaking. One of the women in particular I've become fascinated with is Martha Goodwin Tunstall. Now, nobody knows her name. It's so sad, but she was such a brave and outspoken and courageous woman. She grew up on a plantation that had slaves on it, enslaved people. But when she grew up, she moved to Texas, and she became like ardently an abolitionist against slavery. Apparently, she saw a white man beating a black man and was so outraged by it that she wrote in her diary that she felt that she had to take part in abolishing this. When will this horror end? So she became outspoken about it, and she and her family really suffered. On the day that the southern states seceded from the Union, she and her husband moved out of Texas, and they moved north because they didn't want to be part of that movement. And she later moved back to Texas after the Civil War during the Reconstruction period, but she and her husband were tormented by the Ku Klux Klan. They poisoned their well, and two of her sons died from that poisoning. But she became also an outspoken supporter of women's rights. And I brought a quotation from a speech that she gave.
Oh, please share.
I don't have it memorized, but I wrote it down. This was in 1868. Martha Goodwin Tunstall spoke to the Austin Friends of Female Suffrage, 1868. And this was right before the Texas Constitutional Convention that was held that was considering the issue of suffrage. And she said, I'm quoting, "May not your mothers, your wives, your sisters, your daughters, the women of America have a voice in making the laws and selecting the rulers to whom she owes and to whom she renders the most implicit reverence and faithful obedience." In other words, we should have a voice and we should have a vote. In 1868, she said that, and of course, the motion was defeated. It wasn't until 50 years later that American women got the vote.
Martha Tunstall.
Martha Tunstall.
Is she in your online archive?
She's in the online archive. She's not in the book.
But what's the address of the online archive again?
Speakingwhilefemale.co.
Great.
.co.
.co. No
.co.
M. Okay, got it. What are some of the other women whose voices you have heard or wanted to mention?
Well, one of them is from the book. I included a speech by the great Barbara Jordan. I think many of your listeners will know about Barbara Jordan, but she, to remind everybody, she was a Texas politician. She was from Houston area, and she had a very deep and commanding presence. She conveyed authority and gravity when she spoke. And as a senator, she was the person who introduced the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon, our president, in the summer of 1974. So I included her famous opening statement on the articles of impeachment in the book. And I'll tell you what she said when she opened her remarks. She said, "We the people, it's a very eloquent beginning," referring to the Constitution of the United States. "But when that document was completed on the 17th of September in 1787, I was not included in that we the people. I felt somehow that for many years that George Washington and Alexander Hamilton just left me out by mistake." And by that she means that as a black woman, she feels like black people weren't included in the Constitution, and was it just by error that we were left out? But she goes on to say that no, through the process of law and amendment, the Constitution was expanded to include all Americans, Americans of every color, every race, every creed, and she had full confidence in the strength and the integrity of the Constitution to be referred to in the consideration of whether the president had broken U.S. law.
So how do you hope to continue to build upon this expansive tradition, both in our governance that is more inclusive now of people of color and of women, but also of your archive and the uplifting of women's voices?
Well, what I really hope is that all students, all scholars, all young women, all young people in general will know that their voice matters, and that even if we haven't been reflected in the history books, first of all, we should change that. We should change the history books to include everyone's voice. But we should also be aware that it's imperative that all of us use our voices, because the world that these women envisioned, the world that they worked to create, we are living now. We all have the ability to use our voices, so it's incumbent on us to take that seriously, that responsibility. I mean, we all talk about how important it is that we vote, that we cast our vote. It's equally important that we use our public voices and speak about our values, the changes we want to see, and the world we want to create.
Well said. Donna Rubin, thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks for all of your work, and thank you for watching. You can find all of these speeches at the website speakingwhilefemale.co. Thanks.